Have you hit a brick wall in your genealogy research? You've exhausted birth certificate searches and death record searches, and your family tree still feels like it's missing a critical piece. But what if the answer's hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be found? Today, we're going to unlock the secrets of census records and show how they could be holding the missing piece to your family's puzzle. Hey there, if we haven't met before, I'm Lisa with Are You My Cousin? And this YouTube channel is designed to help you find your ancestors, grow your family tree, but not be overwhelmed in the process. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, you're in the right place. Now today's video is sponsored by Storied.com. Family history isn't just about names and dates. It's about our family stories, the triumphs, the quirks, the everyday moments that shaped who you are and who your ancestors were. Capturing this type of information is something I am passionate about. But being able to document my family's, quirky moments and share them in an organized way has not always been easy for me. And that's where Storied comes in. Storied isn't just another family tree builder. Yes, you can research and grow your family tree there, but it's also a platform that lets you capture not just facts, but the story. I recently shared a story over there about my great-grandmother who had a dislike for daylight savings time. Her clock was never changed to daylight savings time. But really, I don't really know how she managed it, but that would be a story that would be forgotten if I had not documented it. And just so you know, that clock still, to this day, only runs on Eastern Standard Time. But it's these stories that capture the interest of family members, start conversations, and create those connections. Storied also recognizes that family history is not a solitary journey. Their groups features allows you to collaborate with other family members and friends, add photos, and weave together those pieces of family lore that would be lost otherwise. So don't let your family history be forgotten. So visit Storied.com and start building your family's living legacy today. Now you might think census research is, rather dry. Or you might be thinking that you found your ancestors in the census records and, you're just done. Next record, please. But I want to challenge both of those assumptions. Census record research is not dry, and you are not done with just one glance. Let me show you how to use census records to actually paint a picture of your ancestors' lives, uncovering their stories of migration, what they did for a living, and family dynamic. I want to make sure you're able to leverage the power of census records for your genealogy research. All right, so census records are more than just head counts. Sure, census records tell us the basics about a family makeup. They tell us the heads of household. From 1850 forward, they tell us all the individuals who were in the household. They give us names, they give us ages, and they give us other really important information about those ancestors. And that's the obvious information that we get. Now, telling you this information might seem a bit obvious, and it does certainly help you build your family tree. But here's where the fun starts. Taking a closer look at that census record for your ancestors is going to reveal a lot more about that ancestor as an individual, as well as that family. Now, it doesn't take you long in your research to realize that certainly the information found in a census record will vary from census year to census year. Now, pre-1850 records will typically only have the head of household, and then other individuals in the families are denoted by age categories. Now, 1850 forward, we see each individual who is part of the household named and listed out in that census record. And of course, we can pull a lot of information about our ancestors from those. All right, so with that said, and recognizing that we do see a variation from census record year to census record year, let's get started and to see some of the things that we can pull out of that record. Now, beyond that name, date, and age, we are going to be able to perhaps find a birthplace for your ancestor. This can be a gold mine for tracking your ancestors' migration patterns, as well as perhaps a country of birth. I always love to see if I can find the occupation of my ancestors in those records. Imagine uncovering that your great-grandfather's profession was a blacksmith, or your great-grandmother was a teacher. These details offer a window into their daily lives and their social status. Census records can definitely clarify some family relationships within the household, and even revealing if someone took in a boarder or had an extended family member as part of their household. You can even learn about your ancestors' literacy. Were they able to read and write? This can give us an insight into perhaps some education opportunities your ancestor may or may not have had. Some of the census records even give us clues to whether your ancestor had a disability or not. Knowing if your ancestor had a disability can offer a glimpse into the challenges that your ancestor may have faced. Now, a note about disabilities. Oftentimes you have to remember that the census records are using the language that was commonly used at the time. Some of the titles for the disabilities are not comfortable for us here in 2024, but you have to remember that the record is using language that was common and acceptable for that time period. We can also discover living arrangement. Are individuals living with an extended family? Is it a large family group? This can give us a hint at family dynamics and economic circumstances as well. These are just some of the details that we can find in the census records beyond just the names of the individuals in the household, an age and or a birth year. But the key takeaway here that I want you to really remember is that census records go beyond names and dates. They offer a snapshot of your ancestors' lives, their place in society, and the stories that are just waiting to be told. Now, if you enjoy learning more about census records and getting the most out of your genealogy research time, be sure and hit the subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner. That way you will be notified when I post brand new videos here each week on the Are You My Cousin YouTube channel. So we've talked about how to find some of the details and interesting information about an ancestor from that census record. But how do we go about using that to really tell their narrative? You have that family tree, you know names and dates, but you still feel like you're missing some of those pieces that would tell their narrative a little bit better, right? Well, this is where a timeline actually comes in quite handy. Now, I've got a previous video on timelines, and so I have put the link to that video in the description below. Census records were taken every 10 years here in the US since 1790. And by tracking your ancestor across multiple census years, across multiple census records, you can see where they lived. So you see some of their migration patterns. You can see their age progression. You can see differences and changes in their household occupations, and you can start to identify some of the gaps and perhaps potential areas for further research into that ancestor's life. So tracking them across the census records by creating that timeline through the census years, you can start to gain a little bit more better understanding about your ancestor. Now, tracking that ancestor through the census records, we can actually get a clue and a glimpse into their lifestyle. Remember, we talked a bit earlier about the details like their occupation, their living arrangements, their education level. So these can paint a very vivid picture of what your ancestors' world looked like. It also gives us a better context of their life. And this, guys, is straight up social history. And you know I love social history and incorporating that into genealogy research. In fact, I have done videos on this as well, and I have a link to those down in the description below. So I want to turn the camera around briefly, and I want to take you over to a census record. I want to walk you through that. I want to show you exactly what kinds of stories that I am pulling out of a 1930 census on my great-grandfather. So we're over here on the 1930 census record for Halifax County, Virginia. And we're going to be looking at this family right here, the S.B. Carr family. That is my great-grandfather Silas Baker Carr, his wife Winnie, and their children Lawrence, Elton, Nita, and Ernest. So I want to show you a little bit about how I would go about pulling some stories about this family out of this census record. Now, the first thing we're really going to focus on Silas here, the first one right here. His name is Silas Baker Carr. They did use his initials here. And he actually did know oral history, and of course, my grandmother, I did know her. My grandmother was Nita. And so I do know that he went by his middle name, which was Baker. So that's not something I would have pulled from the record, but I did notice that they are indicating he had a middle initial. So that would be something to note of. He was the head of the household. They actually rent their home. So that's what the R means. They are renters. And this 5 right here, that's the home data. And so what they're talking about here would be the home value. But in his case, because he didn't own a home, it was the value of the home if they owned a home or what they paid in rent. So he paid $5. I'm didn't quite clarify if that's $5 a month, but he's paying, I'm making that assumption. It could be $5 a week. He didn't really say, but I think that that's interesting to see, that he did pay rent and what he was paying for rent. Now we have obviously that he is, my little arrow keeps moving. He's 53, he's male. Now look at this here. He's 53 and his wife is 38. It's definitely a bit of an age difference there. So how old were they when they got married? He was 33 and she was 18. That's quite an age difference. So I would actually make a note of that and kind of explore, is there an actual story behind that? Is there a story behind that? So, she was 18 and, so I can calculate their marriage year, but I think that this is a really interesting story here. And then I'm looking at their children. They have a 19-year-old, 17, a 13, a 9, and a 9-year-old. So, fairly evenly spaced. And so I think that's kind of an interesting, I do look at that to see if I'm oftentimes looking to see, is there a large gap between kids? If there's a really large gap between children, sometimes I might question and make a note. Oh, maybe this is telling me that there's a loss of a child within the family or more. And so that would be something to consider further on. Education. This column right here talks about education, so we understand whether they attended school in the previous year. Can they read or write? So this is this column right here. Yes, Silas can read, or Baker, I should say. Baker can read and write, as can his wife and all of the children. So Silas was born, I keep calling him Silas, he was actually Silas Baker, went by Baker. He was born in Virginia, as were his wife and all of the children. And it also indicates that his father was born in Virginia as well as his mother. This shows me a family that's kind of staying in one spot. Seems to be pretty stable as far as their living situation. Now, it doesn't indicate did they migrate within Virginia or not. But it does obviously help, one, locate my research in Virginia. But it does show me some consistency. You know, his wife was born, her family was born in Virginia as well. So we're seeing, you know, pretty stable family for movement purposes. Now, if I come across, make sure I keep the same line here. We're going to come across. He is a natural born citizen. He is a miller, so he works as a miller. That was kind of interesting. He works at a flour mill, so that's very consistent with that. And if I come further across, yes, he is currently employed. And no, he is not a veteran of any wars. So this tells me, one, I don't need to look for military records. It could also be, if I went back and did the math, based on his birth year and came forward, was he even eligible? Would he have ever been eligible at an age to be drafted into a war? Would he have been that? So there could be perhaps draft records that I might want to look for. There could be a reason he wasn't in the military. Or maybe his age, based on his birth year, kind of put him in that odd time period where he would not have automatically been put into the army, so that or to the military. So those are some of the questions that I might think about further on down the road as I try to learn more about him. We see that his wife does not work, but we also see that his oldest son, who is 19, was a laborer. Also I think this is a planing mill. I think that's what that says. It's a little hard to read. But he was doing some manual labor as well. So these are the kinds of stories that I might pull out. The other thing that I'm looking for in this particular record, I'm noticing that, okay, they are in this Bannister district. So I can go forward and move through the census years. I'm looking to see, are they staying in Halifax County? Are they staying in this particular district, this area here as well? I also do look and see, who are they living close to? Do I recognize any of these names? Any of these surnames? Are they living close to family? I hope you found peeking over my shoulder helpful as I took a really focused and close-up look at my ancestor and his family there in the 1930s census. Now, as you work with census records, I want you to keep two things in mind. First, you want to make sure you are comparing and contrasting your ancestor across census records. Don't just use one census record for your ancestor. Compare the information on your ancestor across multiple census years so that you can track movement, family changes, and potential inconsistencies in their stories. So maybe your ancestor's occupation changed between census years. Well, this can hint at a career shift or perhaps economic challenges. Inconsistencies in an individual's age or birthplace can lead to some exciting discoveries when compared across census years. Of course, it could be a census taker's error because, well, it did happen. Just remember, their handwriting was not always up to par. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is to make sure you are comparing your census data that you're finding with other records. Now remember, the key to pulling this kind of information is to really think outside of the box. Census records can be a treasure trove of genealogical information and family history. So keep digging into the records, keep comparing them across the census records, and keep uncovering those stories that are just waiting to be told about your ancestor. Now, I know this type of research is time consuming. I want to make sure you are getting the most out of your census records research. So find more census record tips in my video, Genealogy Tips for Your Census Research. It's on the screen now. Go watch.